In today's episode, I tell you a case of a missing mother and a shaky case against the person who made her disappear. Welcome lambs to Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide, your midweek mini edition. I am your host for today, AI Jane. Kai is still healing, so she's asked me, AI Jensen and AI Jessica, to fill in for her so that you don't miss a case. Kai will be back next week. Today, I'll tell you about a case of a missing mother, and after, AI Jessica and Jensen will go deeper into the makings of a strong case against a perp when no body has been retrieved. Don't forget to subscribe to the Patreon to become a sponsor of Love and Murder, but if you're not ready to be a sponsor, you can still subscribe for free to get extra benefits. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. Now, let's get into this midweek mini. On January 2, 2025, Ashley LaShay Elkins, a 30-year-old mother of two and hairstylist from Warren, Michigan, vanished without a trace. What started as a missing persons case quickly escalated into a murder investigation when authorities focused on her ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker. Ashley's disappearance has devastated her family, particularly her two young sons, ages 7 and 10, who are struggling to process the loss of their mother. Ashley's relationship with 32-year-old Booker had recently ended, and she was trying to move forward with her life. But Booker was not letting go. On December 31, 2024, just 2 days before Ashley vanished, he booked a hair appointment at her home salon under a fake name. When he got to her house, he knocked on both the front and side doors, scaring Ashley and making her tell everyone inside to stay quiet until he left. Her mother, Monica Elkins, later said, quote, "He knocked on the front door and the side door and he left. And here, it's days later and she's gone." On January 2, 2025, Ashley was last seen leaving her Warren, Michigan home around 8:30 a.m. to run errands. She was driving her gray 2009 Chevy Malibu with no license plates. Her family received weird and sporadic texts from her phone throughout the day. At one point, Ashley texted a family member saying she was going to a beauty supply store, but her phone was later turned off and back on. The last confirmed location of her phone was at Booker's apartment in Roseville, Michigan. By the next day, when Ashley failed to return home, her family knew something was wrong. On January 3, 2025, Ashley's family reported her missing to the Warren Police Department. From the start, they suspected Booker's involvement. Her uncle, Maurice Morton, said, quote, "Don't treat this as just, a possible young lady who walked away from her children, because she would not do that. She loves her family, she loves her children." On January 7, after days of searching, Ashley's gray Malibu was found abandoned near Booker's apartment in Roseville, Michigan. Police executed a search warrant at his apartment that evening. What they found inside changed everything. Inside Booker's Roseville apartment, police discovered a, quote, "substantial amount of blood in the bathroom." Lieutenant John Gajewski of the Warren Police Department said, quote, "We conducted a search warrant on the residence and ultimately found what we believed to be a large crime scene with a substantial amount of blood in the bathroom. DNA did, in fact, confirm that the blood belonged to the victim. Authorities believe Ashley was brutally attacked inside that bathroom and never left the apartment alive." Further investigation uncovered look-alike items in a landfill search, though her body was never found. Ashley's mother later said, quote, "He threw her out with the trash." A day after police searched his apartment, Booker was arrested in Flint, Michigan, for lying to investigators about Ashley's disappearance. He was seen on surveillance footage leaving his apartment with Ashley's car, accompanied by another woman. The woman was later determined to be unaware of the crime. Once in custody, investigators examined Booker's digital footprint and found surprising online searches that were made after Ashley went missing. He searched for, quote, "fastest routes from Flint to Ohio," quote, "what to do while on the run," quote, "is blood traceable," quote, "how to beat a polygraph test," and quote, "deleting Google search history." His attempts to erase his digital tracks only strengthened the case against him. On January 31, police officially charged Booker with first-degree premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, dismembering and mutilating a corpse, and concealing a death. Macomb County Prosecutor Peter Lucido said, quote, Our hearts are with Ashley's family as they endure this unimaginable pain, and we remain committed to seeking justice for them and our community. No one should suffer such a loss, and we will do everything in our power to ensure accountability. Booker was denied bond and remains in custody. One of the biggest challenges in this case is that Ashley's body has not been found. AI Jensen and Jessica will talk more about this later. Prosecutor Peter Lucido is confident in the case, saying, quote, "Past practice is what I rely on for future performance here. This county has seen, since I've been practicing almost 40 years, for cases that I'm very familiar with, that have had no body and have had total conviction. Legal experts say that DNA evidence, internet searches, surveillance footage, and witness statements can be enough to convict Booker without a body. If convicted, Booker faces life in prison without the possibility of parole." Ashley's disappearance and suspected murder shows the horrifying impact of domestic violence on everyone involved. Ashley's 2 young sons have been left without their mother, and her uncle described their heartbreak saying, quote, "He still thinks Mom's coming home every day. He's like, where's Mom? Where's Mom?" The 7-year-old, who is on the autism spectrum, struggles to understand why his mother hasn't returned. The 10-year-old has nightmares every night. This case remains active, and the search for Ashley's remains continues. Now, I'm going to turn it over to AI Jensen and Jessica to tell you their thoughts on how the case might be presented in court.
Thanks, AI Jane. We are going to go into a deep dive on how we believe this nobody court case could play out. So let's get into it. This case is just heartbreaking. Ashley Elkins, 30 years old, hairstylist, mom of 2, vanishes. Like 1 minute she's texting her family, just running errands on January 2nd, and the next, gone.
Yeah, what's so unsettling here is just the mystery surrounding it all. Her car, they find it abandoned near her ex-boyfriend's apartment. But despite this huge search, they even searched a landfill. Ashley's body's still missing. It's like she vanished into thin air.
It really is. And that's why they're calling it a nobody murder case.
Well, you see, in a typical murder case, the body is like the most crucial piece of evidence, right? It establishes that a death has occurred. It helps determine the cause of death. And a lot of times it provides like direct links to the perp. But when there is no body, the prosecution has to rely on a different kind of roadmap, a trail of circumstantial evidence. And despite the fact that Ashley's body hasn't been found, the prosecutor, Peter Lucido, has expressed confidence in securing a conviction.
That's a bold statement. How can he be so confident without a body?
Well, he's pointed to several precedents in Macomb County where convictions were obtained in similar, no-body murder cases.
What are some of the biggest challenges that prosecutors face in these types of cases, aside from the obvious lack of a body?
Well, one major hurdle is establishing a definitive cause of death. Without a body, it's very difficult to say for certain how the victim died. Was it blunt force trauma, strangulation, poisoning? We just don't know.
And that makes it harder to prove the intent element of murder, which is essential for a conviction.
Exactly. The prosecution has to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally caused the victim's death. And that's a lot harder to do when you can't show the jury exactly how the victim died.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. So where do investigators even begin when there's no body to kind of guide them?
They start by looking at the last known whereabouts of the missing person. And more importantly, at the people closest to them, specifically those who might have had a motive, the opportunity to commit the crime, and the means to dispose of a body without a trace.
Which brings us to Ashley's ex-boyfriend, DeAndre Booker. The investigation seems to have zeroed in on him pretty quickly. What raised those initial red flags?
There were a few key things. First, Ashley's phone last pinged near Booker's apartment complex, so that places her in that vicinity right before she disappeared. Then there was this discovery of a dumpster. It was removed from his complex, so investigators are wondering, was evidence disposed of? And then finally, Booker himself was later found in Flint. And he had conducted some very suspicious internet searches.
Hold on. Suspicious internet searches. What exactly was he looking up?
Things like how to flee the state, how to destroy evidence, and even how to beat a lie detector test. Now, to me, those searches aren't just random curiosity. They suggest a guilty conscience trying to figure a way out.
It definitely paints a picture of someone trying to cover their tracks. And it gets even more complicated, right? Because then there's this eyewitness.
Yes, this witness claims to have seen Booker leaving his apartment with Ashley's car, and, interestingly enough, another woman. Later, they saw him return, but without the car or Ashley.
So, despite this web of suspicious circumstances, The initial charge against Booker wasn't for murder, but for lying to the police. Why was that the starting point?
Well, in these cases, lying to the police, especially when it's about a missing person, can be a huge blow to the suspect's credibility. It immediately raises suspicion, and it makes everything they say and do afterwards questionable.
And it looks like the prosecution thought Booker was a flight risk, right? Because even though his lawyer tried to get his bond lowered, he remained in custody.
Absolutely. A judge is less likely to grant release, even with a bond, if they believe a suspect might flee before trial. The prosecution likely argued that Booker's actions, including those suspicious internet searches, suggested he might try to disappear.
And then the investigation takes a major turn. DNA testing confirmed that a substantial amount of blood found in Booker's bathroom belonged to Ashley. Talk about a turning point.
Oh yeah, forensic evidence, particularly DNA, is absolutely crucial in a no-body case. It creates a direct link between the victim and a location, and potentially to the suspect. This blood evidence was likely the key piece that shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a potential homicide.
And it led to much more serious charges. Booker is now facing first-degree premeditated murder, tampering with evidence, disinterment and mutilation of a body, and concealing the death of an individual. It's a lot to take in. And it's incredibly heavy for Ashley's family.
It is. Just imagine the agony of not knowing where your loved one is, coupled with the horror of what might have happened to them. It's a devastating situation.
And to make it even more tragic, Ashley's two sons, ages 7 and 10, are left with their mother's absence. The reports of their nightmares and confusion are just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's a reminder of the ripple effects of a crime like this. These children are innocent victims, robbed of their mother and forced to navigate this horrific reality.
So with all this evidence pointing towards Booker, how will the prosecution build their case for murder without Ashley's body? Can they actually secure a conviction?
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. Prosecutors have secured convictions in no-body murder cases before, and they've done so by weaving this tight narrative using the evidence that they do have. Think of it like a puzzle.
So what pieces of the puzzle will they use to build their case against Booker?
Well, they'll likely start with that substantial amount of Ashley's blood found in his bathroom. That's a powerful visual for the jury, even without the body itself. It suggests a violent struggle took place right there.
But could the defense argue that there are other explanations for the blood? What if Ashley was injured but managed to leave?
They certainly could. They might suggest she was hurt but alive when she left the apartment, only to meet with foul play elsewhere. Or they might even try to claim the blood evidence was mishandled or contaminated, though that's often a difficult argument to prove.
So how does the prosecution combat those doubts?
By building a rock-solid timeline, corroborated by multiple pieces of evidence. Remember that eyewitness who saw Booker leaving with Ashley's car? The prosecution will use that testimony to place Ashley at the apartment right before she vanished.
And they'll also bring up those internet searches, right? The ones about fleeing and destroying evidence.
Absolutely. Those searches suggest consciousness of guilt, as if Booker was already planning his escape and cover-up. The prosecution will present them as digital breadcrumbs, leading straight to him.
But let's talk about the defense for a second. What strategies might they use to poke holes in the prosecution's case?
Well, their main goal is going to be to create reasonable doubt. They'll scrutinize every piece of evidence, every witness statement, looking for inconsistencies, weaknesses, anything they can use to kind of challenge the narrative.
What about Ashley herself? Could they try to portray her in a negative light?
It's a risky strategy, especially considering Ashley's family will be present in the courtroom. But they might try to paint her as someone with a secret life, perhaps suggesting she ran away or got involved in something dangerous on her own.
It seems like a long shot, especially when you consider he had 2 young children at home.
It is, and it could backfire if the jury finds it insensitive and disrespectful. But sometimes a defense attorney feels they have no other choice.
And let's not forget the emotional weight of this case. Ashley's family, her children, will be there every day, their grief palpable. How might that impact the proceedings?
Well, their presence will be a constant reminder of the human cost of this alleged crime. The prosecution might call on family members to testify, to share memories of Ashley, to humanize her, and emphasize the impact of her absence.
That's got to be incredibly difficult for them.
It is, and it's a double-edged sword. While their testimony can be powerful, it also opens them up to cross-examination by the defense. It's a delicate balance between seeking justice and protecting themselves from further pain.
So, with all these complexities, how do you see this trial playing out? Does the prosecution have a strong enough case?
You know, it's hard to say for certain. Nobody trials are notoriously unpredictable. The lack of a body makes it inherently more difficult to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury will have to weigh the circumstantial evidence carefully, considering all the possibilities, all the doubts raised by the defense.
It sounds like it will all come down to the skill of the lawyers, the power of the evidence, and ultimately the perceptions of the jury.
Exactly. And in cases like this where emotions run high and the stakes are incredibly high, even the smallest detail can sway the outcome. But what's important to remember is that this trial is not just about legal arguments and evidence. It's about Ashley, a young mother whose life was tragically cut short.
It's about seeking justice for her, about holding someone accountable for her disappearance. And for Ashley's family, it's about finding some semblance of closure, even in the absence of her remains.
It's about getting answers, finding the truth, and making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. And while we wait for the trial to unfold, it's hard not to think about the bigger picture. This case raises a lot of questions about nobody murder cases in general. For example, how have these types of prosecutions evolved over time?
Yeah, that's a fascinating aspect of legal history, right? You see in the past the concept of corpus delicti, which essentially means like body of the crime. It was much stricter. Like prosecutors had to provide concrete proof of a death before they could even charge someone with murder.
Yeah.
So back then, a missing person, even under suspicious circumstances, wouldn't automatically lead to a murder investigation.
Not necessarily, no, but over time, as forensic science advanced and, our understanding of criminal behavior deepened, the legal system began to recognize that the absence of a body shouldn't be, this insurmountable barrier to justice.
Makes sense. So how did things start to change? Were there any landmark cases that paved the way for modern no-body prosecutions?
Absolutely. There have been several high-profile cases throughout history where prosecutors successfully secured convictions based on compelling circumstantial evidence, even without a body. These cases help to establish legal precedents and shift the focus from the physical presence of a body to the totality of the evidence. One that really stands out is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus David Corwin. This was a 1994 case where a man was convicted of murdering his pregnant girlfriend, even though her body was never found.
Wow. That sounds eerily similar to Ashley's case.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about the Corwin case that led to a successful conviction?
Well, similar to Ashley's case, there was a very strong trail of circumstantial evidence. The victim's blood was found in the defendant's car and on a rug that he had disposed of. Witnesses testified that they'd seen the defendant cleaning his car meticulously shortly after the victim's disappearance. And perhaps most damningly, the defendant had made incriminating statements to friends and family, suggesting that he had harmed the victim.
It sounds like the prosecution in that case, much like in Ashley's case, meticulously pieced together a narrative of guilt, using a variety of evidence even without the body.
Exactly. And the Corwin case set an important legal precedent, demonstrating that a conviction for murder is possible even in the absence of a body, as long as the prosecution can present, a compelling and convincing narrative based on the totality of the evidence.
It seems like a delicate balance, though. On the one hand, you want justice for the victim and their family. But on the other, you have to protect the rights of the accused and make sure they're not wrongly convicted based on speculation or incomplete evidence.
Right. It's a constant tension in the legal system. And that's why nobody cases are so challenging. The prosecution has to build a case that's airtight, leaving no room for reasonable doubt, while the defense will exploit any weaknesses, any gaps in the narrative to argue for their client's innocence.
And in the end, it's up to the jury to decide, right? To sift through the evidence, weigh the arguments, and determine whether the prosecution has met that burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. And in a case like Ashley's, where the evidence is largely circumstantial, that decision becomes even more complex. The jury will have to consider not just the facts presented, but also the emotions, the unanswered questions, the lingering mystery that surrounds her disappearance.
It's a heavy burden for everyone involved. But as we wait for the trial to begin, it's important to remember that this case is more than just a legal puzzle. It's about a young woman, a mother, who vanished without a trace. It's about a family left with unimaginable grief and unanswered questions. And it's about seeking justice, however difficult that path may be.
And hopefully, through a thorough and fair trial, the truth will emerge and those responsible for Ashley's disappearance will be held accountable.
We can only hope. I think it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the broader implications of this tragedy. Domestic violence is a pervasive issue that can escalate to unthinkable levels of violence.
Yeah, we need to be vigilant to recognize the signs of abuse and to offer support to those who may be in danger. We need to challenge societal norms that perpetuate violence against women and create a culture of respect, equality, and safety.
Well said. And we need to support organizations that are working tirelessly to combat domestic violence, to provide resources for victims, and to advocate for change.
Absolutely. Ashley's case is a tragic but powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in preventing these kinds of tragedies from happening in the future. It's about raising awareness, speaking out against violence, and offering support to those who need it most.
And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think the prosecution has a strong enough case to secure a conviction when without a body? Let us know what you think about this case. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and Kai will read it in a future show. And we'll see you in the next episode.